Ready when you are.
Well, thank you so much, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Invest Atlanta webinar. My name is Dr. Eloisa Clementich, and I'm the proud president and CEO here at Invest Atlanta. I want to thank you for joining us and for this discussion regarding our Resurgence 2 program. We are very excited to be able to bring some support to you, and I also specifically would like to thank the Department of Treasury and also this City Council and Mayor Dickens for their commitment to small business and nonprofits. And so Melody is going to go over the specifics of the program, but I want to say a couple things. First off, thank you for what you do in our city. We could not be as vibrant and an exciting place to be without your support and your commitment. First and foremost, we are doing all we can to try to not only see you successful, but thriving here in our wonderful city. And lastly, I just want to say we really hope that these funds can be helpful to you in your future and your success in Atlanta. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Melody and just say thank you for being here. Look forward to seeing you successful and for your continual partnership in making this a wonderful city for everyone to enjoy. So Melody, I'll let you take it away on the details of Resurgence 2.
Eloisa. Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Melody Eccles. I'm Invest Atlanta's Assistant Director of our ARP programming. I'm happy to be here and share a presentation with you all on our Resurgence Grant Fund. We're covering a lot of information regarding the application and just details requirements. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A. We wanted to make sure we did a webinar specifically for our nonprofits. It's new for us that we're able to grant funding to nonprofits, and we're super excited about it. So we just want to make sure that we're here to answer any questions, maybe specific to your nonprofit organization. So drop your questions in the Q&A throughout the presentation, and we'll have some time afterwards to go through them. I will share the screen. So today we're going to go through a lot of information, like I said, just the purpose of the grant fund, timeline. We'll get into the eligibility requirements, grant and receipt requirements, what is an eligible expense, use of proceeds, some compliance and documentation. And I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about that 2022 City of Atlanta Letter of Good Standing that's specific to nonprofits. And then we'll get into the application review as well. So first and foremost, the purpose of the Resurgence Grant Fund is to use federal COVID relief funding under the American Rescue Plan Act to provide reimbursable grants to small businesses and now nonprofits throughout the City of Atlanta. Invest Atlanta just acknowledges the financial impact that our small businesses and nonprofits have faced over the past couple of years due to COVID, and we're fortunate enough that City of Atlanta has allowed Invest Atlanta to program these dollars to provide some financial support to our businesses and nonprofits, and hopefully that the grant funding will just alleviate some of that burden. So here's the timeline. We started doing some webinars and outreach back February 15th. We have some recorded webinars from that date on our website, but we're continuing to do outreach throughout the entire process. Applications opened this past Tuesday, March 1st, and they will be open until April 29th at 5 p.m. So we're having the application open for a full 2 months. We're hoping that this gives our businesses and nonprofits plenty of time to gather their documents, get their letter of good standing, get their business license if they need their business license, and just be able to submit a fully completed application. So getting into the eligibility requirements, really for a nonprofit organization to be eligible, there's just a few requirements we have. First, that they can provide their organization's IRS determination letter. If you don't have this on hand, unfortunately, I think you'll have to reach out to the IRS to get that letter, but it should be on file somewhere. So we'll need to see that for your organization. Either a 2022 City of Atlanta business license or that letter of good standing. We know several of our nonprofits are not required to have a business license. That's okay. If you do have your business license, please submit that. We can also accept proof of confirmation that your business license fees were paid for 2022 if you don't have the physical license yet. But if you're not required to have the license, then we can accept the 2022 City of Atlanta letter of good standing, and I'll get into more details of that later in the presentation. We also ask that our applicants can show that they had fewer than 250 employees as of December 31st, 2021. And then a couple attestations that we ask for. First, that they can attest to having a financial hardship due to COVID. This is just via an affidavit. I'll touch on this in the document section, but it's just a simple one-page affidavit asking our applicants to attest that, yes, they experienced a financial hardship. And then finally, asking our applicants to attest that the expenses that they're submitting for reimbursement haven't already been covered by some other federal COVID relief funding source or local COVID relief funding source. And I'll touch on that in the document section too. And then just a list of a few ineligible businesses. There's a full list on the program overview section of the application, as well as our website. But just to name a few for your reference, any business engaged in illegal activity is not eligible to apply. We can't accept corporate-owned franchises or life insurance companies. Any financial businesses that are, lenders, banks, finance companies, unfortunately can't grant out to them. Foreign businesses or government-owned entities are also ineligible. Businesses engaged in adult business as defined by city code. If your business or organization is owned or operated by an official or employee of the City of Atlanta or Invest Atlanta, unfortunately cannot apply to the Resurgence Grant Fund. If your organization has been contracted by Invest Atlanta for some other sort of ARP programming, we're not able to grant funds out to them. Pyramid sale distribution plans, and then any business or organization that's previously defaulted on a City of Atlanta or Invest Atlanta loan or grant or other form of assisted financing is not eligible to apply. And that's the majority of the ineligible criteria, but there's a full list on our website and application as well. So getting into the grant amounts and receipt requirements. So grant amounts, they're up to $40,000. They are reimbursable. They can cover costs associated with COVID, the cost of business interruptions due to COVID, and some other expenses. We'll go over exactly what eligible expenses are in a few slides. But since they are reimbursable, we are required to ask our applicants to provide receipts and proofs of payment. We can cover expenses that were incurred as of March 3rd, 2021 and later. And acceptable forms of proof of payment and receipts are first being itemized invoices and receipts dated March 3rd, 2021 and later. We need to see that what exactly the funds were spent on, so making sure that they're itemized, and if the receipt invoice indicates that it's paid and we can show that it was paid, that's great. A lot of times, we'll receive invoices that don't necessarily show a method of payment or don't show clearly that it was paid. So if that's the case, you can submit the invoice, but we'll also need to see some sort of proof of vendor payment. So if you paid that invoice with a check, we'll need to see a canceled check or similarly a wire transfer confirmation. We can even accept credit card or bank statements just to show that whatever invoice you provide has in fact been paid. If you use the payment app, we get a lot of Cash App or Venmo, PayPal, Zelle, those sorts of payments. That's totally fine. We can accept screenshots of the payment confirmation that show the vendor was paid, shows the date. The date's important. We need to see clearly that it was March 3rd, 2021 or later, and just showing that confirmed it was paid. We can also accept the email confirmations. A lot of times the email confirmations just more clearly have all that information visible, so that'll help too. If you're requesting reimbursement for payroll, we can accept timesheets, payroll records for that. I apologize. And then if you're requesting reimbursement for commercial rent or mortgage, then we'll need to see a copy of a fully executed and current commercial lease. In addition to proof that those lease and rent payments were made, we'll need to see a copy of the lease to ensure that the rent amount matches up with the payment amount. And it's important that this lease is current, so it has to be current as of whatever time frame you're asking for reimbursement. A lot of times applicants will submit a lease that maybe originated back in 2015 and it had an initial 2-year term. That is not something that we can validate because it expired in 2017. So we'll need to see a renewal for the period that you're requesting reimbursement. So if you're in that situation and you're asking, you plan to ask for reimbursement for your rent payments, and you don't know if you have that renewal, just make sure to reach out to your landlord and see if you can get that renewal. Make sure that it's signed by both you and the landlord. So what is an eligible expense? We've created different categories that I'll get into to help guide you in figuring out what exactly is eligible. But biggest thing to remember again is that March 3rd, 2021 date. Expenses there and later are potentially eligible. So the first category being purchase or lease of machinery and equipment or modifications to existing equipment. This is any equipment that may have been necessary for you to purchase due to COVID. You know, at the end of the day, you all know your businesses better and organizations better than we do. So if there's some purchase that you had to make because of COVID, you know, we may ask for a little bit of clarification on that, but definitely submit that as potentially an eligible expense. Next being purchase of PPE, any sanitation or disinfection. If you invested in a professional disinfection service, you know, that's eligible. Any purchase of gloves, masks, hand sanitizer, things like that are definitely eligible. Again, rent or mortgage payments. I do want to clarify that this is just for commercial spaces. We do allow home-based businesses and organizations to apply. However, we cannot reimburse those businesses and organizations for their home rent or mortgage payments. It has to be a commercial space. And then payroll and benefits costs. We are able to reimburse those from March 3rd, 2021 through March 31st, 2022. Similarly, any costs to retain employees, utilities costs, emphasizing this is just commercial utilities costs. We can't pay your home electric bill, but if you have a commercial space, we can reimburse for those utilities and other operating costs. Implementation of COVID-19 prevention or mitigation tactics. This can be, you know, if you've had to invest in plexiglass barriers, or if you had to sort of reconfigure your workspace so that your staff could adhere to social distancing, or if you've had to invest in some sort of technology to have touchless payments, or if you had to create a virtual sort of portal or web page to reach your clients without that face-to-face interaction, all of that would be considered an implementation of COVID-19 prevention or mitigation tactics, as well as if you've had to, you know, pay for regular COVID testing for your staff. All of that would fall into that category. If you invested in any sort of technical assistance or counseling or other services that, you know, helped your business planning during COVID, help, you know, figure out your financials or your strategy. If you've had to pivot strategies due to COVID in order to stay operating, that would fall under that category. And then finally, we just have other necessary expenditures. And this just gets back to what I was saying about how you all know your organizations better than we do. And if there was some expense that you incurred, that you can provide an explanation of why it tied to COVID, definitely submit that in the other category. And, you know, again, our processors may reach out for a little bit of clarification, but at the end of the day, you know, you guys know your organizations better than we do. And then I also included some ineligible use of proceeds, similar to the ineligible criteria for organizations. There's a full list on our website, but I did want to just name a few. The biggest one being loss of estimated or expected revenue. I've already received several questions about being reimbursed for that. Unfortunately, we are not able to reimburse for any loss of expected or estimated revenue. We can't cover any damages that have been covered by insurance, legal settlements or judgments. We can't reimburse severance pay. We can't reimburse reimbursement to donors for donated items or services. We can't reimburse any debt service or debt payments. And then finally, just any cost prior to March 3rd, 2021, we can't reimburse it. That March 3rd date is very important. So getting into some compliance requirements, again, it's a grant, not a loan. So you don't have to pay us back, but we do ask for a few things from our grantees. We ask that they use best efforts to at least retain, if not expand, their current levels of employment. We also ask that within a year of receiving grant funds that they use their best efforts to complete at least 15 hours of volunteer work with a local nonprofit. Obviously, since nonprofits are allowed to apply, we're asking that you guys spend 15 hours with a different 501c3 of your choice, as long as they're located within the city of Atlanta. We don't have any restrictions around that. It's really just whatever is most convenient for you, or if you have regular volunteering that you do anyways, as long as they're located within the city of Atlanta. We also ask that within a year of receiving grant funds that our grantees submit to us an annual progress report. And this is a report that will include it on the grant agreement so that you guys are aware of exactly what questions we'll be asking, but really just around, if you were able to retain or create any new jobs, how's your revenue looking, some narrative type questions. We really just want to be able to see the impact that the funding is made so that we can hold ourselves accountable and make sure that, the grant program is really doing the work that we're hoping that it does for you guys. So that'll be sent out via an electronic survey. So you won't have to print, mail anything. We'll send it directly to your email address for you to just fill out online, and we'll get the results automatically. And then just the attestations, a couple I'd already mentioned, but first being attesting via just a simple affidavit that your organization did experience a financial hardship due to COVID. We also ask our applicants to attest that they'll use these funds for COVID-19 prevention and mitigation. And finally, we ask that our applicants attest that whatever expenses you're asking to be reimbursed by the Resurgence Grant Fund haven't already been covered by some other source of funding. We don't want to be in the business of having our grantees double dip into different funding sources to cover the same expenses. So documentation requirements, I'll probably spend the most time here. This is exactly the documentation that's listed in our application. There are links to download these documents on the application, as well as directly on our website, which I have links to at the end of the presentation. But first, we'll ask for a driver's license or other government issued ID of an authorized representative. We ask that when providing this identification that you redact your ID number as well as your birth date. We just don't want to have any of your personal identifiable information in our system, so that's really just to protect you all. We're asking for payroll documentation, even if you're not asking to be reimbursed for payroll. The payroll documentation is for us to ensure that your business or your organization, in fact, did have less than 250 employees as of December 31st, 2021. So this can be a Form 941 for Q4 of last year, or it can be whatever detailed payroll journals that you have, however you keep your payroll, that just reflects the number of employees of your organization. We're asking for the IRS determination letter. Again, hopefully you have that on file. I have received some inquiries about not being able to find it. Unfortunately, I think you'll just have to reach out to the IRS to get a copy of that letter. A City of Atlanta 2022 business license or letter of good standing. Again, we know a lot of nonprofits aren't required to have that business license, so we will accept that letter of good standing, and I'll speak more to that in just a bit. If you're required to have your Secretary of State registration for nonprofits, I believe it's only required for corporations. So if you're a corporation, then make sure you have your 2022 annual registration. And then as well as the SAVE affidavit. This is an affidavit we require just by being a government organization. There's a link to it, again, on our website and in the application. Make sure that that's notarized and that it's completed by an authorized representative. The SAVE affidavit asks for a secure and verifiable ID to accompany it, and that could be the driver's license or passport that you've already provided. Just make sure on that SAVE affidavit there's a question on there for you to just declare what the form of ID was. So make sure you just write in driver's license or U.S. passport, whatever your ID is. There's also a link on the application to a list of what all verifiable documents are. So that could be helpful to you as well. We ask for a W-9 form. There's a link to that on our application. This is just so that our finance team can process checks to the correct organization. We have a certificate designating authorized grantee representative. This is a form that we've created in-house, and it's really just to ensure that whoever is signing documents on behalf of your organization is in fact authorized to do so. So that's just a simple one page where we ask for specimen signatures of whoever is authorized to sign. So when we're reviewing documents, we're just ensuring that those signatures do match whomever is considered an authorized representative, and that should be notarized as well. The duplication of benefits certification and supporting documentation. This is probably the document that will take the most time out of all of them. This is getting back to ensuring that the expenses that you're submitting to us for reimbursement haven't already been covered. And this really, this was a result of all the different COVID relief funding sources. And after the last round of the Resurgence Grant Fund, the biggest compliance concern that we had was just ensuring that we weren't doing just that. So the duplication of benefit certification will just ask our applicants to declare whether they've received any other sources of COVID funding in 2021. We're just asking for funds received in 2021. And if you have, just declaring what the source of funding was, how much it was, and what it was spent on. And we'll ask for proof of that. So if your organization received PPP, for example, we'll ask for the PPP loan document or agreement just to ensure just so that we know how much funding you received. And if it was all spent on payroll, then we'll ask for you to provide the payroll journals to substantiate the fact that it was paid. And then on our end, our processors will just make sure that you didn't also then submit payroll to us for reimbursement as well. So that's the analysis we're doing. We're really just trying to make sure that applicants aren't double dipping into several sources of funding for the same expenses. The financial hardship affidavit, also just a simple one-page affidavit asking our applicants to attest to a financial hardship. If you'll notice, we're not asking for any financial documentation. We're not asking for profit and loss statements, projections, tax returns, anything like that. And this was a direct sort of response to the Resurgence Grant Fund program that we launched in 2020. We realized that it created a barrier for a lot of our businesses to be able to provide that documentation, and a lot of our applicants didn't get to complete a full application because they ran into that barrier. So with the ARP programming, we really did follow Treasury guidelines and their suggestions to see how we could alleviate this barrier. And so what we've done is Invest Atlanta has compiled several different sources of data to support the fact that small businesses and nonprofits in the city as a whole were financially impacted by COVID. So we put together that case for the program as a whole. So as long as an applicant is eligible for the program guidelines, they don't have to show the numbers exactly for their organization. But we do ask that they just sign and notarize this affidavit just to provide us with a little bit more compliance comfort on our end. And then the last piece is not required unless you're submitting reimbursement for commercial rent expenses. So if you are submitting commercial rent receipts for reimbursement, we'll need to see a copy of that executed lease, again making sure that it's current and that it's fully executed by both business owner and the landlord. So now I want to talk about the letter of good standing. So again, we know a lot of our nonprofits aren't required to have their business license, so they can have a letter of good standing in lieu of that. It's just an online request form through the city's ATL 311 portal. We have a link to that request form in our application as well as on our Resurgence landing page. So if you go to www.investatlanta.com/resurgence, all this information can be found there, and you can find a link to the city's ATL 311 portal. And it really just asks for basic information, your name, address, phone number, business name, address, things like that. It does ask for a valid government issued ID, so make sure you have that. So a driver's license or a passport, make sure you upload that to ensure that it is being processed timely. It does take up to 30 days to receive your letter of good standing. Again, this is just processing times with the city. But again, the application doesn't close until April 29th. So we hope that this provides enough time for letters to be processed and sent out. I would recommend that you can begin uploading all your other documents to your application as you await your letter, and then you can upload your letter and submit the application once it's received. There's an option in our grant application system where you can save your application and come back to it at a later date rather than submit it. But if you do submit it and there's, you realize there's something missing or there's something that you uploaded incorrectly, we can always reopen the application for you. But using the save feature instead of the submit feature is a good way to go as well. And you can also provide other documents with your letter of good standing application form. You can upload as many documents as you want. If you want to upload your IRS determination letter or your Secretary of State registration, if you have that potentially could be helpful in their review process as well. And then also on the form online, there's a link there asking you if you want to register with the ATL 311 portal. And I would recommend that you do that because by registering an account with ATL 311, you'll get automatic updates. You can see the status, and it'll just keep you up to date on where your letter is at in the process. So reviewing applications are going to be reviewed as they're submitted, but applications at the end of the application period, they'll all be scored based on several different criteria specific to the ARP programming, and ultimately those scores will determine grant amounts. So we do encourage that you get your application in as soon as you can, but it doesn't necessarily provide any advantage to getting it in as soon as possible. We'd rather it be complete and accurate than just rushing to get it in early on. So that's the review process. And then I have some helpful hints here as well. First, all this information is available on our website. You can go to the direct link, theinvestatlanta.com/resurgence. But there's a link to that landing page directly on Invest Atlanta's homepage. You really can't miss it if you go to investatlanta.com. It's right there front and center. We have program overview, FAQs that we're constantly updating, links to old webinars, links to all the required documentation for you to download. And we also have a live chat feature where you can speak with one of our representatives during business hours. You can set up virtual office hours with them. We also have a customer service email. If you email resurgence@investatlanta.com. I personally keep an eye on this email account and do my best to clear it out every couple of days. So we are trying to be super accessible to you all and your questions. We've also created a Resurgence hotline number, so jot down that phone number, and we have our application processors who are available during business hours to answer any questions in real time. We will have additional webinars, so stay tuned for those. We do have one this evening specifically for business licenses. If your organization does get their annual business license, we have a webinar at 4 p.m. this afternoon. There's a link on our investatlanta.com page to register for that if you haven't done so already. And we are going to record it in case you can't make it. We have recordings available on our website and also streaming on Invest Atlanta's Facebook page, so you can check us out there as well. And then the last helpful hint that I like to tell our applicants is to make sure that you include your legal business name in your application. The legal business name that you include in your application is what we use to populate our grant agreements, and we need to make sure that it's consistent on all documents, especially on the W-9. The W-9 and the grant agreement is what our team uses to process check payments, so we need to ensure that those are consistent with each other, and that is down to capital letters, lowercase letters, comma, LLC, really making sure that down to punctuation that it is consistent across documents. So with that, I will open it up to questions. I see there's a few in the chat if someone from the team wants to read out, but I will leave this screen open just so you all have a chance to jot down that email address, the webpage, as well as the Resurgence hotline number.
Okay, Melody, the first question we have is, in the application, question C8 reads as follows: is your business certified as one or more of the following by the City of Atlanta, GDOT, and or MARTA? The response options are simply yes or no. Can you please clarify?
Yeah, so there's different certifications that you can receive throughout the city. Some, disadvantaged business enterprise, small business enterprise. Those are specific certifications that a lot of organizations and small businesses have through the city. If you answer yes to that question, it should pop up to an option for different certifications. That's really just for reporting purposes on our end. It doesn't make you eligible or ineligible. It's just for reporting purposes on our end.
Okay. Our second question is, are payroll and benefits costs incurred for existing employees between 3/31/2021, 3/31/2022 eligible for reimbursement as long as they weren't covered by PPP loan or similar program?
Yes, that's exactly right. You think you said it better than I did. That's exactly right. Any payroll costs beginning March 3rd, 2021 through March 31st, 2022, that is eligible for reimbursement as long as it wasn't already covered by PPP or any other COVID relief funding source. Yes.
Okay, the next question is, would fees for professional development and coaching for the staff qualify?
I think potentially. I think something like that, I'm thinking, would probably fall under that technical assistance or counseling services category. We may, ask for some clarification on why that was necessary due to COVID. If it was some business coaching that occurred to, just to have some services to figure out how to keep your business thriving during COVID. I think that all makes sense. If there's a question about whether or not an expense is eligible, I would still encourage you to include it in your application. And there's not a limit to how many documents you can upload. So if you want to maybe just write out a quick explanation on a Word doc or PDF and include that as well, it would help with just the review process.
Okay, the next question is, please clarify cost to retain employees.
Yeah, so that language came directly out of the ARP guidelines. So I don't really have a specific definition. If, I kind of put that on you guys as applicants. If you had some necessary expense that you incurred to make sure that your employees stay coming to work, that would fall under that category.
Can we be reimbursed for actual loss of revenue?
No, we cannot reimburse for loss of revenue, unfortunately.
Okay, the next question is, can a person's address be redacted?
I'm assuming this means for the driver's license or passport. In that case, I would say yes, your individual address. You can redact that if you'd like. The address that we will need on file is the business address. So assuming that your business is located not in your personal home, then sure, you can redact that from your ID as well, as long as on the business license or the letter of good standing. We obviously want to see the address of the business to ensure that it's within City of Atlanta boundaries.
Okay, the next question is, what about if your board or nonprofit is composed of all volunteers?
So I think that question may require a little bit more discussion. I want to make sure that, I can, really understand your question on how those volunteers are set up with your organization. If that person doesn't mind shooting an email to that resurgence@investatlanta.com, just to make sure I answer your question accurately.
The next question is, what if you do not have any employees due to COVID for the last 2 years?
So that's Fine, as long as, that's, to me, no employees is less than 250 employees. If you are still operating your organization as, just yourself, your organization is still conducting business, then to me, having no employees is less than 250 employees. So you can just declare that.
Okay. Several of the questions in the application request information about the business owner. As a nonprofit, we don't have an owner. In responding, can we use the information about any of the officers listed on our Secretary of State registration?
Yes, that's absolutely fine. Just by business owner, that could be any officer of your organization. Yes.
If PPP was received and expended in Q1, can we apply for reimbursement for Q4?
Yes. So you can, as long as the expenses you're submitting for payroll haven't already been covered. If your PPP covered the first half of 2021, then we can potentially reimburse the second half of 2021, as long as they just don't overlap.
Okay. If your nonprofit has a City of Atlanta business license, is a letter of good standing still required?
No, the letter of good standing is just an additional option for our nonprofits who maybe don't have their business license. But if you have your business license, then definitely submit that with your application.
Okay. For nonprofits with a parent subsidiary structure, can subsidiaries apply to this program independently, or can only the parent company apply on behalf of all the subsidiaries?
So both entities can apply independently as long as they are in fact separate entities that have separate EINs, separate registrations, separate business license or letter of good standings. As long as they are on paper separate, then yes, they can apply. They will need to apply with a separate application.
Okay. Where will funds be dispersed? To an authorized representative or the business owner?
They will be directly to the business or organization. The check will be written to the business or nonprofit organization.
Okay. If we are submitting receipts for reimbursement for expenses we've already incurred, why will we also need to sign the affidavit stating we are going to use these funds for the prevention or mitigation?
Yes, we're reimbursing, but at the end of the day, this is cash in hand now. So at the end of the day, this is a COVID relief, and the funding came from federal government because of COVID, right? We want to make sure that we're being responsible with the funds that are being provided to businesses, because the goal is essentially to get, hopefully, to a post-COVID environment one day. So we're just really asking our applicants just to be responsible with the funds that we're providing in form of a grant, just so that we are doing our best to move forward through this pandemic.
Okay. We are still waiting on our 2021 business license. What can I upload to provide proof my business is current?
So we can accept proof that your 2022 fees have been paid. I believe in order to do that, then you'll have, as long as your 2021 fees have been paid, even if you don't have your physical license, you should be able to go on to the city's business license portal to pay your 2022 fees. So we don't have to necessarily have the physical license in the application. We know that takes a long time to receive from the city, but as long as you can prove that your fees for 2022 have been paid, then we can accept a screenshot confirmation of that, an email confirmation, and we can double check on the city's business license portal. I would encourage whomever asked that question to attend our 4 o'clock webinar if you can. If not, definitely watch the recording. I'm sure a lot of other applicants have similar questions that they're going to pose in the webinar tonight, and we'll have someone directly from the city to be there to answer those questions.
Okay, does a nonprofit applicant also need to volunteer at another nonprofit if awarded?
Yes, we do ask that all grantees spend at least 15 hours of volunteer time with some 501c3 in the city. And we are asking that if you are already a 501c3, that you volunteer with a different one. So yes, we do ask that as a compliance requirement.
And our last question is, if an employee is sick with COVID directly impacting the hours of operation and the ability to run business, can we ask for rent reimbursement along with utility supplies and payroll?
If I'm understanding that question, I think what the question is, if we can reimburse for that person's personal rent and utilities. And that answer is no. But I want to make sure
The business, though, I think they're saying that even if they were sick with COVID, can they still be reimbursed for their business rent because they had commercial rent, but they weren't able to be there?
Got it. I see. Thank you for that. Yes. As long as you were paying that commercial rent through the eligible time period, yes, we can reimburse you for that. Thank you, Patrice.
That was the last question we have in the Q&A.
Cool. We'll give just another minute or so if you guys have any last minute questions. But again, all of this information is available on our website. If you just go to investatlanta.com, there's a huge banner on the homepage that brings you to the Resurgence page. And there's so much information. There's links to recorded webinars. There's links to the upcoming webinars, an FAQ document that we do our best to keep updated, program overview that outlines the eligibility, ineligibility requirements, all the required documents you can download there. And then again, our email address and our Resurgence hotline number, make sure you jot those down too, because we are accessible in those avenues as well.
We have two more questions, Melody. One is, does that include supplies and utilities? That was the person who asked about while they were sick with COVID.
Yes, any utilities, operating costs, rent, whatever expenses you had to keep your commercial space up and running during COVID, we can reimburse for that.
And another question, does this grant include South Fulton?
So we are restricted by City of Atlanta limits. If you are unsure whether or not your address falls within that, feel free to shoot a question to that email address. We have a City of Atlanta GIS lookup tool where we can put in the address and confirm whether or not it falls within or outside of, but we are restricted by City of Atlanta limits.
Okay, we don't have any more live questions at the moment.
Perfect. Well, again, I just want to thank you all for joining us this morning. These have all been great questions. You know, we're going to continue to have these webinars, have these meetings, just so that we are accessible to you guys. I think I saw another question pop up.
They didn't type it yet, but they said they have a follow-up.
Okay. Maybe give a second. Or if that person just wants, okay, I think maybe it.
Would the rent reimbursement be prorated?
I'm assuming that question is for the March 3rd date. So yes, if you're submitting rent for the month of March, then yes, we will prorate it to ensure that we're only covering March 3rd to March 31st. That's a great question. And that March 3rd date isn't something that we just arbitrarily created. That's straight out of Treasury guidelines that we have to follow.
Okay. This last question, this grant would be, excuse me, to reimburse funds lost due to COVID, correct?
So we cannot reimburse any loss of revenue or expected or estimated loss of revenue. Unfortunately, that is an ineligible expense.
That was the last question. Well, for now.
It's okay. We have some time to let them trickle in. But yeah, so again, thank you all for joining us, and we're happy to answer any questions Feel free to keep putting them in the Q&A, send them to that email address, call the hotline. If it's after hours, you can still call the hotline and leave a voicemail, and the voicemail will get forwarded to that email address. So we do receive them, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. We do our best to clear those out every couple days.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. One is, we have been sick for 10 days and we cannot make enough to pay rent. Can we ask for the full rent reimbursement?
Unfortunately, no, this is strictly reimbursable, and that is based on Treasury guidelines. We have to see that the expenses were in fact paid before we can grant out the funds.
Okay, and then one other question. How soon will the funds be distributed to the business?
Yeah, so I've gotten that question a bit, and it really is hard to say because it truly depends on the volume of applications we receive. As I mentioned, the applications close April 29th, and at that time, we will make sure that all applications that have been submitted are reviewed for eligibility, and then all eligible applicants that have provided all the required documentation, answered all the required questions, they will be scored by an external scoring committee based on metrics defined by ARP and just, preferences of the city. And based on those scores, they will then determine the grant award. So it just depends on the volume of applications we receive, especially if we get a ton submitted right at the end of the application period. But I would say that it's safe to say within 6 months of the application closing is when we can expect to start dispersing funds.
Okay, one statement here, I think it kind of is asking for clarification. We are unable to pay for our 2022 business license if the city hasn't sent out the invoices.
Yeah, so again, we have, sorry, was that the end of the question?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so again, we have someone from the Department of Revenue coming to speak with us later this afternoon to speak specifically to those concerns. We're aware that the processing times can take a little bit of time within the city. We're hoping that this webinar will provide a little bit of clarity on how exactly to make sure your fees are paid, and hopefully that'll just make it easier on you guys, because we do know that it's been a process to get the City of Atlanta business licenses. So we're doing everything we can to be accessible and bring someone in from the Department of Revenue to speak specifically to it.
Okay, we don't have any other open questions at the moment.
Okay.
Okay, will the Resurgence hotline answer our additional questions?
Yeah, so the Resurgence hotline, really, they're there to answer any kind of questions about where to find the application. If you need clarification on an application question, if you're having trouble finding something, those type of questions, I would call the hotline. But if you have any nuanced, specific to your organization questions, I would urge you to email it to the Resurgence at Invest Atlanta, just so that there's a little bit more time for us to, intake your question, digest your question, and opportunity to set up a time for a quick chat if needed. So if it's any question that has a lot of detail and context and nuance, shoot it to the email address. But for any immediate, quick clarification type questions, feel free to call the Resurgence hotline.
Is there a scoring rubric?
Yes, we do have a scoring rubric that we're finalizing. Really, the goal of that is just to ensure that funds are being dispersed to businesses and organizations that truly are in the most need. So some metrics are, based on the ARP guidelines. If, a business is located in a qualified census tract as defined by ARP guidelines. We're also focusing on, minority businesses, businesses located in historically disinvested areas within the city. We will consider how many other funding sources you received. We really just want to ensure again that with our limited one-time funding, that we really are using it in the most responsible way, and that the funds are going to businesses that are in the most need.
Will applicants be able to see the rubric?
That's a good question. Let me check on that, and if that person can shoot me an email, I can follow up with that. We're still finalizing it, but it'll be scored by an external scoring committee.
Okay, each time we get each time we get additional forms to submit, we would just add our additional info to our application, correct?
So there's a spot in the application for every required document, but if there's something that maybe is missing, maybe you get an email from one of our processors or a task from the application portal asking for a little bit more information. Yes, there's a spot for you to directly upload that to your application. If you're having trouble with that, that's something that you can call the hotline for, just to make sure that you have all the information you need and are uploading it in the correct spot.
Okay, so we still have a few more minutes if anybody has more questions. We don't have anything in the box right now.
Okay. I'll just go through this one more time as maybe some more questions trickle in. Just again, investatlanta.com, going to that homepage, there's a huge banner right on the homepage that brings you to the Resurgence landing page where you can find all of this information. And make sure to jot down that email address, resurgence@investatlanta.com, as well as our Resurgence hotline. I think maybe, did one come through, Katris?
Yes, once rent and license fees, including business licenses and alcohol licenses are paid, can we ask for reimbursement for those payments in full?
So unfortunately, no, we can't reimburse for license expenses.
Okay.
Good question. I haven't gotten that one yet.
If a nonprofit is registered in the city of Atlanta, but provides services to both residents and non-residents of the city, would they still be eligible?
So as long as your organization is registered with City of Atlanta and is located, the physical business address, whatever address is on either your business license or your letter of good standing, that address must be within City of Atlanta limits.
Okay. We don't have any questions right now.
Okay. Give just a couple minutes. And we are streaming this on Invest Atlanta's Facebook page as well. So in all of our past recordings should be there also. So feel free to check us out on Facebook. And again, all this information is at investatlanta.com. If you don't follow us already on social media, we have Instagram and Twitter that we're constantly posting updates on, just announcements, other funding opportunities potentially. If you're not subscribed to our newsletter, I would recommend that you do that. If you just go to investatlanta.com and just scroll all the way down to the bottom, there's a button that says stay in touch or stay updated on our news. We do a newsletter that has all of our opportunities available.
Is there a possibility that the grant will run out of funding for all applicants?
So yeah, it really just depends again on the volume of applications we receive. We have $10.4 million to directly fund out to businesses. So there is always that potential depending on how many applications we receive and how many eligible applications we receive. So there is always that risk. And again, this is just one-time funding. The amount we have to grant out directly is $10.4 million.
So then Does this mean this will be on a first come, first served basis?
No, so it's not on a first come, first served basis. It really depends on that scoring. That will be done by an external scoring committee. Again, our goal is to make sure that the funds are dispersed to businesses and organizations who really are in the most need. So there's no advantage to getting your application in super early. We would rather you take the time you need to ensure that all the information on there is accurate, that you've taken some time to put thoughtful narratives in your application, because we will consider how COVID has impacted your organization, and there are a couple narrative questions on the application. So it's not first come, first served. It's really who we want to see, who is eligible based on our grant guidelines, and then we will score accordingly.
May an organization or business submit receipts for multiple categories such as rent and payroll?
Yes, absolutely. You can submit as many receipts in as many categories as you possibly can. If you have, there's also no reason to submit exactly $40,000 worth of receipts. If you have maybe just a little more than that, it doesn't hurt to just upload whatever you think could potentially be eligible, because you never know if in the receipt review process we may see something that we have determined is ineligible based on our criteria. So it doesn't hurt to just upload whatever you think is eligible. We will cut you off at that 40,000, but there's no pressure to just stop providing documentation once you hit that 40,000.
Any last questions in our last 3 minutes?
Well, I think that's probably a good stopping point. And again, if you have any other questions that just come into your head later, you forgot to ask, we are accessible to you. Shoot us an email at resurgence@investatlanta.com. Call our hotline. You can use our live chat feature at investatlanta.com to speak directly with a representative during business hours. You can set up virtual office hours with one of our representatives as well. We really are here to answer all of your questions. And I hope this presentation was helpful to you all. I appreciate the engagement and all the really good questions, and I hope that it was helpful. And yeah, again, just thank you all for being here, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.